Segment is intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law constantly changes. The information may not be complete or correct depending upon the date and your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts. Different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of these differences, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. And Marshall Chriswell joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us again. We've been talking about attorney-client privilege in recent weeks. I want to sort of expand that conversation, maybe beyond that, to the basic duties, responsibilities that an attorney has in relation to their clients, which I know is pretty broad, but maybe you could narrow that down for me some.
Sure. Right. And we've been talking about confidentiality, which is really, as we discussed, kind of one of the cornerstones of our legal system. And it's also maybe the most important ethical duty that an attorney owes to their client. But as you alluded to, there are many duties that we owe to our clients. Attorneys are fiduciaries, meaning that we have very high legal legal obligations as far as professional conduct and ethical duties to the people that we're representing. So what ethical duties do we owe to a client? And another way of putting that is, as a client, what can you expect from your attorney? So, and when we learn about this as law students in law school, we usually, in your first professional responsibility class, learn about the 4 C's. Okay. And the first one is confidentiality. Okay, so that's hugely important. And next is competence. Attorneys have to be competent in the areas of law that they're practicing and the cases that they're taking on. So you have to either have some experience in those areas before taking on a matter, or you have to be willing to do the work necessary to learn the area of law before taking something on or during the process of taking it on. So it's important that your attorney is competent in that area, and that ethical responsibility is one of the reasons that we see so much specialization now. In law, you have attorneys who practice nothing but personal injury law, or nothing but estate planning, things like that. The specialization has been in part, and in part it's marketing and things like that as well. But it's in part due to the ethical rules which require you to be competent in the area that you're practicing.
Okay.
So
those are 2 of the C's.
That's right. And the third C would be conflict avoidance. You hear of conflicts of interest when dealing with legal matters. So if I have a client who is involved in a case, I can't take on another client whose interests would be adverse to that of the first client that I'm representing. I have a duty not to do that. And that can get very tricky for lots of reasons. I practice here in a small town. I have to be very, very diligent about the clients that I'm taking on and making sure that none of the matters that I'm handling currently or that I've handled in the past are in conflict with that. None of those clients are in conflict with this client, and it's an analysis that has to be performed every time you take on a case.
And you make a great point in that because of it's a small town, you may have handled something, say client A is suing client B and you're representing client A. Years ago, you may have represented client B's brother in some other case.
That's right, and so I would have to look at just because I represented a relative of the defendant in this case, doesn't necessarily make it a conflict. But let's look at what the terms of that representation were. Okay. And is there anything about this case that would be it would be to the detriment of either that prior client or this current client for me to take on the representation. And if I do that analysis and I come up with a reason that it might be detrimental, whether it's by virtue of the confidential information that I'm receiving, or the impact that the case could have on one of those potential clients, then I probably shouldn't take that case on unless and you can get clients to waive conflicts. You can have a discussion with them and say, hey, I have a potential conflict here. Would you be willing to sign off on it so that I can take on this other representation? You can do that in a lot of cases, but it's an interesting balancing act, and like you said, particularly in a small town.
Yeah, and one of the interesting applications of that is we talk generally about civil law here, but we see it in the criminal courts as well, from cases that are referred to the Attorney General's office because, well, there's an obvious conflict. I was once a defense attorney, now I'm a prosecutor.
That's right.
Or I was a district attorney, now I'm a judge. Those all are potential conflicts of interest.
Right, and judges judges in some cases have to recuse themselves from those sorts of matters. If you go from a private law firm to the bench and become a judge, there are going to be your prior partners and associates that worked at that firm can be coming before you, and while that's not always a conflict, sometimes the matters that they're bringing before you, the cases they're bringing before you, are cases that you worked on or knew about. Those recusal rules directly come out of these ethical rules of conflicts.
I would guess as well that in a judge's case, particularly, he might or she might say, I don't believe that there is a real conflict here, but I can see as a basis for appeal in the future, so let's just nip it in the bud and move it on to another court right off the bat.
Yeah, sometimes you have a duty to get out of a case even if there's an appearance of a conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we've covered 3 of the C's. What's the 4th?
The 4th is communication. So an attorney has a duty to zealously represent their client's interests and to communicate with, keep the client informed about what's happening, updates on the case, what's happening in the case, and giving the client the opportunity to guide what steps you're taking in the case. Now, and there's a line there. The attorney, by the rules, the attorney basically plans the strategy, can decide what motion to file, things like that. But the big decisions have to be made by the client. Okay, whether to settle a case. An attorney can never settle a case without a client's permission. In a criminal case, whether a client is going to testify or not, that's a decision that only the client can make. The attorney can't make that for them. Whether to who you're suing, who you're going to name as defendants or co-defendants in a case. The big decisions in the representation the client has to make, and an attorney has an ethical duty to communicate all of the facts and as much of the law as the client can understand or wants to know, to help them in making those decisions.
There will be a pop quiz on the C's for everybody afterwards, by the way. All 4 of them, you have to know them. You have used the term several times during this conversation this morning, ethics. Ethics as a guiding principle should be pretty much in place for everybody in any profession, but particularly important in yours.
It is, and I mentioned, professional responsibility classes in law school. It's very important. It's taken very seriously. I think the general public, a lot of times, their only knowledge of attorneys, or a large part of what they know about attorneys, is when they see them getting in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I was going to raise that point. We only hear about that when someone has violated those.
That's right. And attorneys are routinely, when they violate, are caught, because the rules of professional responsibility, the disciplinary regulations are very strict. So it's taken really seriously, even as a part of our continuing education requirements. Every year, attorneys have to take so many continuing legal education credits, and a percentage of those every year you have to take so many classes in ethics, and it's required by the state bar. And it's really taken very seriously. And I think by and large, the professionals, the attorneys that I deal with, do take their ethical responsibilities very seriously.
I think people would be surprised, too, to find out the various applications of the 4Cs or of the ethical responsibilities of an attorney. It really does go across the board, doesn't it? When you're estate law, for instance, is one thing that we talk about frequently here. One might think, well, what could possibly come to bear ethically on that? But you have a responsibility to keep confidential the information that somebody gives to you when planning an estate.
All of those duties come into play in just about every kind of a matter. In an estate, as you said, doing an estate plan, there is a lot of confidential information. So I have a duty to safeguard it from down to the paper and electronic files I keep in my office and ways that I have to secure those. Also, if I have other clients come in that know previous clients, I can't start talking about what other clients are doing, and so there's confidentiality. There's the competence aspect of it. You have to be competent in what you're doing. Communication, all of them, and conflict avoidance as well. If I'm representing somebody for a couple for an estate plan, and they pass away, their estate's being implemented, and there's one of their children or a beneficiary maybe that isn't getting as much as they think. Can I come in and represent them? No, I can't, because I previously represented their parents or these other folks as in the plan. So all of the aspects of ethical responsibilities come into play in just about everything that you do.
Absolutely. Okay. So somebody wants to learn more about you and your practice. What do they need to do?
Give me a call at 724-465-5826. Go online to www.westernpalawyer.com or come see us in the Atrium Building downtown.
He is Marshall Chriswell. Thank you, sir. Have a wonderful day.
You too.